final Dalek episode of Classic Who, Remembrance of the Daleks, introduces us to two opposing Dalek factions locked in a bitter civil war. The Imperial Daleks, white and gold Daleks created to serve Davros, and the Renegade Daleks, grey and black Daleks from the old regime who fight for the Supreme Dalek. Within the Doctor Who fandom, you can also find another similar conflict, debate and disagreement between fans of the Imperial Daleks and fans of the Renegade Daleks. Because one fictional faction of pepperpot fascists has to be superior to the other, right? Well, ignoring the fact that Remembrance of the Daleks clearly indicates that the answer is no, today we are going to wade into that debate and decide once and for all which faction is superior. Is it the ragtag renegades with their hand-me-down casings and gaffer-taped plasma ball time machine? Or is it the upstart Imperials with their tacky colour scheme and total inability to hit anything? Let's find out. But first, let's address the elephant in the room. As you can probably tell from my profile picture, I have a particular fondness for the Renegade Dalek faction. What can I say? I root for the underdog. But for this video, I will need to set my support of the wobbly grey goons aside and view this debate with total, unequivocal objectivity. Using pure, unadulterated facts and irrefutable logic, I'm going to prove once and for all that the Renegade Daleks are superior to the Imperials. And not because the Renegades are the faction that I happen to have arbitrarily attached myself to, but because when viewing the evidence, it's clearly the simple and honest truth. Let's start from the beginning. Renegade Daleks are blobs, right? And Imperial Daleks are bionic blobs with bits added. This is how Ace describes the Dalek Civil War in Remembrance of the Daleks, and even this brutally simplified summation of the war gives us our first inkling into what's actually going on here. Renegade Daleks are pure Daleks, whereas Imperial Daleks are cyborgs modified by Davros. This is why Imperial Daleks have a giant bionic claw that they can use to throttle people when they get too close, and why Renegade Daleks are apparently made out of silly string. Renegade Daleks are unaltered. They are akin to the Daleks seen in previous Classic Who episodes, whereas the Imperials are a product of Davros' experiments in turning recently deceased humans into makeshift Daleks. Going back to the basics of Dalek philosophy, it's clear that the Renegade Daleks are the true Daleks and the Imperials are aberrations. The only reason why the Imperials cannot process their own status as deviations from the Dalek norm is because Davros programmed them to believe the opposite. From the point of view of the Dalek Empire, therefore, Renegade Daleks are superior, Imperial Daleks are inferior. But it would be silly to stop the debate there, because there's more to this than just the Dalek perspective. We see in New Who that Daleks do go on to adopt cybernetics into their construction, with post-Time War Daleks being so dependent on their casings that at times it becomes difficult to tell where the Dalek creature ends and where the cybernetic engineering begins. So clearly the Imperials can't be impure simply because they're cyborgs, because not long after the Civil War ends, all Daleks are cyborgs. So was our initial assessment incorrect? Not quite. While it is true that Daleks do become more reliant on cybernetics in the post-Time War era, the way in which this is implemented is very, very different from that of the Imperial Daleks. A Time War Dalek mutant can, in theory, leave its casing. An Imperial Dalek cannot. Imperial Dalek mutants are described as having cybernetics grafted onto their very body, meaning if you scooped an Imperial Dalek out of its casing, what you'd end up with is a grotesque mass of flesh with bits of robot parts sticking out everywhere, including the claw, whereas we see in New Who that even in the post-Time War era, Daleks are still biological creatures driving their casing tanks rather than creatures that are grafted into the mechanized shell. If anything, the Imperial Daleks sound more similar in construct to Cybermen than standard Daleks, and from what we hear in audio stories like The Juggernauts and In Remembrance, it seems like there is more truth to that assessment than many fans may expect. Moving away from the physiological differences between the Renegades and the Imperials, we will now take some time to discuss their capabilities in combat, and from what we see in Remembrance of the Daleks, the difference is night and day. Renegade Daleks are consistently depicted as a powerful and dangerous threat in this episode. Even one is enough to rout an entire military force, and a small group is more than enough to besiege a fortified position. Renegades slaughter human soldiers whenever they encounter them, and they are more than a match for their Imperial enemy. In the famous bridge tunnel shootout scene, we see that 2 Renegades can hold their own against twice as many Imperials, and the Imperials have to retreat and take several casualties while the Renegades are barely scratched. The Imperials, meanwhile, are run through the mill in this story. They get blasted by the Renegades, they get disorientated with rainbow glitter and destroyed with plastic explosives, and Ace beats the bumps off one of them using a baseball bat and obliterates another with a well-aimed anti-tank rocket. Ace's baseball bat was, of course, powered up by the hand of Omega, so we'll overlook that particularly embarrassing mark on the Imperials' record. It's the anti-tank rocket attack that really illustrates how weak the Imperial Daleks are. We've seen Daleks destroyed by precise placement of explosives or ballistics in the past, particularly in Resurrection of the Daleks, but in each instance seen previously, the weapons in question were either sourced from the far future or were used against Daleks who were clearly on the back foot and not at the height of their power. Remembrance of the Daleks pits a fresh off the line Imperial Dalek against the 1960s rocket launcher, and against all odds, the primitive human weapon turns the Imperial Dalek into scrap metal. This clearly vexes the Doctor, of all people, who was banking on Davros's new faction of shiny white and gold warriors sweeping the Renegades aside and claiming the Hand of Omega for themselves. The Doctor is shocked at the fact that one of these Daleks is destroyed by an anti-tank rocket from the 60s, and it's clear that he has to recalculate his entire plan when presented with this information. He's angry and annoyed at the abject fragility of the Imperial Daleks and realises that he'll have to step in and lend them a hand in defeating the Renegades if his grand plan is going to succeed.
You've destroyed it. Good.
It is not good. Nothing about this is good. I made a grave error of judgment. Oh, I'm beginning to wish I never started all this.
But wait, you may be thinking, the Imperial Daleks have a trick up their gunsticks, the Special Weapons Dalek. As we see in Remembrance of the Daleks, the Special Weapons Dalek can turn Renegade Daleks into piles of ash and can blow up a gate with such ferocity that every emergency service from Cardiff to Croydon gets a call complaining about the noise. The Special Weapons Dalek essentially wins the Dalek Civil War single-handed, so surely it alone makes the Imperial faction superior to the Renegades. Well, not exactly. While it is true that the Special Weapons Dalek is an extremely powerful anti-Dalek weapon, more than capable of eradicating entire squadrons of Daleks, if anything, this exemplifies the inherent weakness of the standard Imperial Dalek drones even more. They were so incompetent in combat that they felt the need to bring in this Deus Ex Machina on wheels to do their work for them, placing the fate of the entire war on the shoulders of a single Dalek unit. We see in the episode that the Special Weapons Dalek is transported from the Dalek mothership to Earth via a shuttlecraft. All it would take is one tactical strike on that craft and the Imperial Dalek's ace in the hole will be obliterated. What would they do then? They rely on the Special Weapons Dalek as a crutch, but take that crutch away and the Imperial Dalek faction would surely fall. The Renegades, meanwhile, focused on honing their individual skills in warfare. Most of the Renegades we see in Remembrance of the Daleks are veterans of old Dalek campaigns like the Mavellan War, and that's why they are able to win in skirmishes against the Imperials despite being heavily outnumbered. The Imperials put all their bumps in one basket, and while it did pay off for them in this specific instance, tactically speaking it's a serious faux pas. Don't forget that were it not for the Doctor's interference, sabotaging the Renegade Daleks' time machine so they couldn't get away, the Renegades would have secured the Hand of Omega and departed before the trundling Special Weapons Dalek could even reach them. And let's also not ignore the fact that the Imperial Dalek attitude of going all in on a single strategy is ultimately their undoing. According to lore from books and comics from the 90s, while the Renegades spread themselves out across the universe, the Imperials consolidated their entire force on Skaro and the Dalek mothership. And once the Hand of Omega ravaged Skaro and destroyed the mothership, the Imperial Dalek faction was all but eradicated, while the small groups of renegades scattered across time and space were able to outlast their Imperial enemies and eventually rebuild the Dalek Empire under leadership of the Dalek Prime once the dust had settled. And there we have it, a comprehensive explanation of why the Renegade Daleks are superior to the Imperials. What do you think? Do you contest the assertion that the Imperials are inferior to the Renegades? Which faction of the Dalek Civil War is your favourite? And do you think we will ever see any Imperial Daleks in a future Doctor Who story? Let me know in the comments below.
Don't forget to click below to subscribe to
Dalek Bumps.